My name is Sindoni. Today's program is entitled Origin of Earth Revealed. What will be revealed today might anger and confuse many of you, or may even shock you about the origin of Earth. Because if what I am about to share with you is true, then our governments and religious orders have been lying to us for a long time. Many of you have heard me say, if you don't know where you've been, how in the world will you know where you're going? Well, my lineage is through the Jewish faith, or the Jewish religion, and the tribe of Abraham. So for me, this story was one that I read very closely and read between the lines to see if there was any hint of my origin here on earth, of its early beginnings. The information that I am about to share with you can be found in a book entitled The Lost Words of Enki, Memoirs and Prophecies of an Extraterrestrial God, written by Zecharia Sitchin. I will begin with reading excerpts from the introduction of the book. Some 445,000 years ago, astronauts from another planet came to Earth in search of gold. Splashing down in one of Earth's seas, they waded ashore and established Eridu, home in the far away. In time, the initial settlement expanded to a full-fledged mission Earth, with a mission control center, a spaceport, mining operations, and even a way station of Mars. Short of manpower, the astronauts employed genetic engineering to fashion primitive workers, Homo sapiens. The deluge that catastrophically swept over the Earth required a fresh new start. The astronauts became gods, granting mankind civilization, teaching it to worship. Then, about 4,000 years ago, all that had been achieved unraveled in a nuclear calamity brought about by the visitors to Earth in the course of their own rivalries and wars. What had taken place on Earth, and especially events since human history began, has been culled by Zecharia Sitchin in his The Earth Chronicle series from the Bible, clay tablets, ancient myths, and archaeological discoveries. But what had preceded the events of Earth, what had taken place on the astronauts' own planet, Nibiru, that caused the space journeys, the need for gold, the creation of man? What emotions, rivalries, beliefs, morals, or the lack thereof, motivated the principal players in the celestial and space sagas? What were the relationships that caused mounting tensions on Nibiru and on Earth? What tensions arose between the old and young, between those who had come from Nibiru and those born on Earth? And to what extent was what has happened determined by destiny, a destiny whose record of past events holds the key to the future? Would it not be auspicious were one of the key players, an eyewitness, and one who could distinguish between fate and destiny, to record for posterity the how and where and when and why of it all, first things and perhaps the last things? But that is precisely what some of them did do, and foremost among them was the very leader who had commanded the first group of astronauts. Scholars and theologians alike now recognize that the biblical texts of creation, of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the Deluge, the Tower of Babel, were based on texts written down millennia earlier in Mesopotamia, especially by the Sumerians. And they, in turn, clearly stated that they obtained their knowledge of past events, many from a time before civilization began, even before mankind came to be, from the writings of the Anunnaki, those who were from heaven to earth came, the gods of antiquity. And one who had been an eyewitness to all those events, indeed a key participant in them, was the leader who had splashed down with his first group of astronauts. At that time, his epithet name was he whose home is water. He experienced the disappointment of having command of Earth mission given to his half-brother and rival, Enlil, Lord of the Commander, a humiliation little mitigated by granting him the title Enki, Lord of Earth. Enki was relegated away from the cities of the gods and their spaceport in the Eden, or Eden, to supervise the mining of gold in the Abzu, southeastern Africa. It was or Enki, a great scientist who came across the hominids who inhabited those parts. And so, when the Anunnaki, toiling in the gold mines, mutinied and said, "No more!" it was he who realized that the needed manpower could be obtained by jumping the gun on evolution through genetic engineering, and thus did the atom literally, he of the man earthling, come into being. As a hybrid, the atom could not procreate. The events echoed in the biblical tale of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden record the second genetic manipulation by Enki that added the extra chromosomal genes needed for sexual procreation. And when mankind proliferating did not turn out the way it had been envisioned, it was he, Enki, who defied his brother Enlil's plan to let mankind perish in a deluge, the events whose hero has been called Noah in the Bible, Zecharia in the early original Sumerian text. So who was Enki? Enki was the firstborn son of Anu, Nibiru's ruler. Enki was well versed in his planet Nibiru and its inhabitants' past. An accomplished scientist, he bequeathed the most important aspects of the advanced knowledge of the Anunnaki, especially to his two sons, Marduk and Ningishzida, who, as Egyptian gods, were known there as Ra and Thoth, respectively. But he also was instrumental in sharing with mankind certain aspects of such advanced knowledge by teaching to select individuals the secrets of the gods. In at least two instances, such initiates wrote down, as they were instructed to do, those divine teachings as mankind's heritage. One called Adapa, and probably a son of Enki by a human female, is known to have written a book titled Writings Regarding Time One of the Earliest Lost Books. The other, called Imid-Duranki, was in all probability the prototype of the biblical Enoch, the one who was taken up to heaven after he had entrusted to his sons the book of divine secrets, and of which a version has possibly survived in the extra-biblical book of Enoch. And though Enki was the firstborn of Anu, he was not destined to be his father's successor on the throne of Nibiru. Complex rules of succession, which reflected the convoluted history of the Nibirians, gave the privilege to Enki's half-brother Enlil. In the effort to resolve the bitter conflict, both Enki and Enlil ended up on a mission to an alien planet Earth whose gold was needed to create a shield for preserving Nibiru's dwindling atmosphere. It was against that background, made even more complex by the presence on Earth of their half-sister Ninharsag, the chief medical officer of the Anunnaki, that Enki decided to defy Enlil's plan to have mankind perish in the deluge. The conflict carried on between the two half-brothers, even among their grandchildren. The fact that all of them, and especially those born on Earth, faced the loss of longevity that Nibiru's extended orbital period provided, added personal agonies and sharpened ambitions. It all came to a climax in the last century of the 3rd millennium BC, when Marduk, Enki's firstborn by his official spouse, claimed that he, and not Enlil's firstborn son, Ninurta, should inherit the earth. The bitter conflict that included a series of wars led in the end to the use of nuclear weapons. The ensuing, through unintended result, was the demise of the Sumerian civilization. The initiation of chosen individuals into the secrets of the gods had marked the beginning of priesthood, the lineages of mediators between the gods and the people, the transmitters of the divine words in the mortal earthlings. Oracles, interpretations of divine utterances were commingled with the observation of the heavens for omens. And as mankind was increasingly drawn to take sides in the godly conflicts, prophecy began to play a role. Indeed, the term to denote such spokesmen of the gods who proclaim what was to come, Nabi, was an epithet for Marduk's firstborn son, Nabu, who had tried on behalf of his exiled father to convince mankind that the heavenly signs bespoke the coming supremacy of Marduk. These developments sharpened the realization that one must distinguish between fate and destiny. The proclamation of Enlil, sometimes even of Anu, that used to be unquestioned, were now subjected to the scrutiny of the differences between Nam, a destiny, like the planetary orbits whose course had been determined and was unchangeable, and Namtar, literally a destiny that could be bent, broken, changed, which was fate. Reviewing and recalling the sequences of events and the apparent parallelism between what had happened on Nibiru and what took place on Earth, Enki and Enlil began to ponder philosophically what indeed was destined and could not have been avoided, and what was just fated as a consequence of right or wrong decisions and free choice. The latter could not be predicted. The former could be foreseen, especially if all, as the planetary orbits, was cyclical. If what was shall be again, if the first things shall also be the last things. The climactic event of the nuclear desolation sharpened soul-searching among the leaders of the Anunnaki and raised a need to explain to the devastated human masses why it came to pass this way. Was it destined, or was it just the result of an Anunnaki-made fate? Was anyone responsible? Is there someone accountable? In the councils of the Anunnaki on the eve of the calamity, it was Enki who stood alone in opposition to the use of the forbidden weapon. It was thus important for Enki to explain to the suffering remnants Hot that turning point in the saga of extraterrestrials who had meant well but ended as destroyers had come to pass. And who but or Enki, who is also known as, who was the first to come and an eyewitness to it all, was most qualified to tell the pause so that the future could be divined. And the best way to tell it all was as a first-person report by Enki himself. That he, Enki, recorded his autobiography is certain, for a long text stretching over at least 12 tablets discovered in the library. Nippur quotes Enki as saying, "When I approached Earth, there was much flooding. When I neared its green meadows, heaps and mounds were piled up at my command. In a pure place I built my house, an appropriate name I gave it." The long text continues to describe how or Enki then assigned tasks to his lieutenants, putting their mission to Earth in motion. Numerous other texts that relate varied aspects of Enki's role in the ensuing developments serve to complete Enki's tale. The autobiographical memoirs and insightful prophecies of an extraterrestrial god were presented, and they were dictated in text to a chosen scribe, a book of witnessing to be unsealed at an appropriate time. It brings to mind Yahweh's instructions to the prophet Isaiah, 7th century BC. "Now come, write it on a sealed tablet, as a book engrave it. Let it be a witnessing until the last day, a testimony for all time." Isaiah 30th chapter 8th verse. In dealing with the past, Enki himself perceived the future. The notion that the Anunnaki, exercising free will, were masters of their own fates, as well as the fates of mankind, gave way in the end to a realization that it was destiny that, when all was said and done, determined the course of events, and therefore, as the Hebrew prophets had recognized, the first things shall be the last things. The record of events dictated by Enki thus became a foundation for prophecy, and the past becomes the future. In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for watching The Origin of Earth Revealed.
How I know you.
Hi, my name is Sindoni. Today's program is entitled Origin of Earth Revealed. What will be revealed today might anger and confuse. Well, my lineage is to the Jewish faith, or the Jewish religion, and the tribe of Abraham. So for me, this story was one that I read very closely and read between the lines to see if there was any hint of my origin here on Earth, of its early beginning.
How I know you.
Beginnings. The information that I am about to share with you can be found in a book entitled The Lost Words of Enki, Memoirs and Prophecies of an Extraterrestrial God, written by Zecharia Sitchin. I will begin with reading excerpts from the introduction of the book. Many of you, or may even shock you, about the origin of Earth. Because if what I am about to share with you is true, then our governments and religious orders have been lying to us for a long, long time. Many of you have heard me say, if you don't know where you've been, how in the world will you know where you're going? Well,